Okay, good. So the participants is 33, means that, okay, we're ready. Okay, this morning, the first session of this IVC and the 5th day, it's very nice to have Wolfgang Kerzendorf. Okay, I hope I pronounce correctly.
Very good.
Very nice to have you here. Thank you very much for your time. I'm excited to hear your talk about this very interesting software to do novae, I think, supernovae, yeah, radiative transfer. Okay, so let us hear what Wolfgang have. I'm very sure this will be very interesting. So please, Wolfgang, your time.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the invitation. Everyone can hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Put your thumbs up if you can hear. Very good. So I'm very excited. Let me just do this and have a few people here on the screen. I'm very excited to talk about the TARDIS code. So first of all, I think it would be great whoever would like to just clicking this way. Whoever would like to show their face on camera, I think that's always a lot of fun, and we can interact better if I see people's faces. But if you don't want, there's no, I mean, whatever you prefer. I'm very excited to be giving this lecture here on modeling supernova code with TARDIS. TARDIS is a project that started, is a passion project of mine that started roughly 10 years ago when I was finishing my PhD, and there was no good open supernova rate of transfer code available. And so I started this with a colleague of mine, Stuart Sim, and has grown, and I'm very happy that now halfway across the world people are excited about it and are potentially using it. So currently I'm in New York, and this is 8 at night here. Normally I'm in Michigan, but I'm visiting New York, and I want to share TARDIS, and I want to explain how it works, and I want to do a little bit of an interactive session. But I want to make clear that, by now TARDIS was started by me, but it's no longer only done by me, and it's now developed by a whole team of people, and I'm presenting on their behalf. The other thing that I'd like to do is please do interrupt me and ask many questions. Please don't be shy. I think this is what science is all about. We're not here to know, we're here to learn. So I think that's a really important part. I will have some interactive part where I sort of try to switch over, so please then bear with me. There's a chat going on. Please then bear with me. And so I think when I'm showing it, probably it's best to not try to do it yourself at the time, but maybe it's better to sort of install it after the lecture. I will have to go pretty quickly after the lecture, but there's ways to contact me and the team and talk to them if you have any follow-up questions. So please use this. So maybe first of all, I should introduce myself from a scientific point of view. I'm Wolfgang Kerzendorf, and more than happy to be called Wolfgang. I'm an assistant professor at Michigan State University. I'm doing two things. I'm in the Department of Physics and Astronomy on one side, and then I'm in a new Department of Computational Mathematics, Science, and Engineering on the other side. So I do physics, I do astrophysics, but I also do data science and machine learning, which is a very exciting field where we're trying to use computers and algorithms to understand the world better. In many fields, not only in astrophysics. And on that part, I really care. In the astrophysics part, I care about the life and deaths of stars, and TARDIS is part of this. But I also care about research infrastructure, and we're researching. One of the research that we do is trying to figure out how to make science better and use algorithms to make science easier and more accessible. We're doing research. We're doing peer review research. So what we do in Michigan State University, I work on supernova remnants with my team as well, surviving companions and stellar populations, but we also do nuclear star clusters, and I sort of want to introduce this. If anyone has any questions or if anyone wants to reach out to you, reach out to us. It is so rare that our communities connect, and so I'm very excited that this is happening. So today we're going to specifically talk about transients. Supernovae are part of transients, the family of transients, which are events that happen on small timescales. And then I'm going to first of all introduce TARDIS a little bit, and then sort of give a break, and we can talk a little bit if you have questions, and then I can share a little bit the research we do with TARDIS, and that might be also an interesting topic for us to discuss if you have any questions about supernovae. And then as I said, like, we're doing this AI research assistant, but that might not be that important today. But if you have any questions about this, we're all very, so my team is very much into open science. We share all of our science. If you have any questions, we're more than happy to talk about this. So as I said, this is not only me who's developing this anymore. There's a whole collaboration. These are just some of the team members, and I want to acknowledge them. This is the team currently at Michigan State University, which is Andrew Fuller, Tona Chichian, and Jack O'Brien. And you see they're all we're all a very young team. We have at NYU, where I'm currently at, where I'm visiting, Mark Williamson, but we have many other people like Isa Camacho Neves, and you can see on the lower right corner, Stuart Sim, who sort of helped us develop this. We are also working with computer scientists. So if you're not, I think you're all astrophysicists, but if you're sort of interested in, if you're a computer scientist or software engineer, we have a big open team. And so essentially we also do astrostatistics with Johannes Buchner, and a lot of the work that I'm going to be showing was a lot of the work comes from this side. So anyone can join the TARDIS team. We're very excited to work with people around the world. As I said, we have summer project. We're an interdisciplinary open science project to work on the TARDIS rate of transfer code that I'm going to introduce today. You can also follow us on Twitter, reach us out on Gitter, and this is like a chat service, and you can talk to us there if you have questions about installing. You don't need to be an expert coder, just interested in working on team and learning. Skills building and mentoring is built into our collaboration, and we're participating as a mentoring organizations in Google Summer of Code. This might be something for people here that are interested in doing more software coding. But this is sort of a slide that I'm also going to show at the end, but I want to make sure that you guys know this is we're open to collaboration, and so this is maybe an interesting venue if someone wants to reach out afterwards. So how does TARDIS work? So one of the first quick things is I want to do a very quick radiative transfer primer. How many of you, if you can raise your hands, have seen this formula? Okay, a few. You can use very nice. Oh, look, many people. So maybe not everyone has seen this formula. I'm going to explain this a little bit. So we have on the left-hand side, this is the intensity. This is the intensity of light. This is essentially the energy per second per unit wavelengths going in a specific direction. So this is also per steradian. And so if we have, we can calculate the light coming through material. So rate of transfer is essentially showing how light goes through material and how it is changed. And this is essentially the intensity of the incoming light times this exponential. It's also called Beer's law, and you will also have this in medical physics for those that have a different background. This is a simplified absorption only law, but essentially I think that applies really well to the supernova case that I'm presenting today. So we have e to the minus n for the number density. So this is how many particles per cubic centimeter. Then we have a so-called thing called a cross section, which you can imagine is it is a measure of probability, but I mean, in the simplest case, you can sort of think about this how large these particles are that we're looking at. And then we're sort of seeing how far we travel. And so essentially what we're doing is we're saying what is the intensity of light? The intensity of light is the intensity of the incoming light into the box, and then times e to the minus how many particles there are, how large the cross section is, and how far we have traveled. So if we travel very far, then essentially it will be zero, right? It goes to it. This exponential goes to zero if we go travel very far, or if the cross sections are very high, or if the number densities are very high. So let me do this maybe as an example, and we can see here like a box with a couple of particles in there. We have the number density is quite low, and also this cross section, so the size of the particles is very low. And so if light goes through, we can walk a long time until we hit a particle. And so statistically, essentially, we can travel a long time until this intensity gets lower and lower and lower. I hope, and if there's any questions, please speak up. More than happy to answer any questions. Let me make sure there's the chat window up so I can see what's going on. And so we can also play this. We can also say well, if we have the number density is the same as before, but now we make them bigger, we make the cross section high, you can see we interact with more particles, and so we don't have to travel as long to have our intensity drop. I hope that explains some of this. But we can turn this the other way around, and we can say, well, no, what if you make many particles per cubic centimeter? What makes the number density high, but sigma low? And we can sort of see that has a similar effect. We hit particles earlier, and that means the intensity is going to drop for a given input intensity I0. And we can again turn this around and say, let's take the number density low again and make the cross section high. Oop, that didn't do this. Anyway, so if we increase the cross sections, what would happen? We would make the balls very big. And so essentially, this measure of the e to the minus n sigma L, we can change each one of them, and we can the intensity goes down accordingly. So if we travel a long time, the intensity can go very far. If we make the cross sections very big, the intensity can also go down quickly, or if we make the number density big. And so essentially what I'm showing you today, TARDIS is a relatively simple code to do these kind of things. And it conceptually it's simple, but there's lots of stuff around it that needs to work for actually to calculate how much does the intensity go down and for a given wavelength. So let me quickly introduce line transitions, which are very important to TARDIS. So essentially, we have a simple atomic model, and I presume, as you all undergrads, you have learned atomic models in your physics class. Just a quick primer, essentially atomic models can be, or atoms have different energy states. We have a ground state, we have excited states. And so essentially, we have a distribution, atoms are distributed in the number of atoms in front of you. Some of them are in the ground states, some of them are in excited states, and essentially there's this equilibrium where they currently always go from ground states to excited states and back. And the temperature of the room in front of you, or the temperature, will tell you if there's more or less in the excited state. So a lower temperature gas will have less atoms in the excited states, and a higher temperature gas will have more atoms in the excited state. And so this is important when we want to talk about this N, because we want to know for line transitions, and we're going to go to line transitions in a second, how many atoms are in the lower level of our line transition, to sort of calculate how many atoms are able to receive light at a specific wavelengths. And so this is my next slide. Essentially, these are line transitions. So we can, we're not going to talk about this today, but this is less of an important thing in TARDIS is the emission of lines. So when we go from a higher excited state to a lower excited state, these are the excited states that I was just showing in the last slide. We emit a photon. If we go from a higher excited state to a lower excited state, we can also have a photon with the same wavelengths come by and make it more likely, which is called stimulated emission. And essentially what we're mostly going to talk about today, and what I mostly want you to take away from this, is absorption. If essentially we have a photon coming in, we can lift lift the atoms from one state to we can lift the atoms from one state to the other. And so this is a very, very important part of TARDIS. And let me quickly switch over to show you. This is a very important part of TARDIS, but this is not only a very important part of TARDIS, this is also a very important part of astronomy. Let's just do this here. Share. Okay, I'm hoping you can see this now. Essentially, this is the sun, the spectrum of the sun, and we can see here there's absorption by hydrogen, and this is exactly what I was just talking about. So we have, like, the sun being a black body sending a continuum of photons, and then above the surface of the sun we have absorbing material, and this here is like lifting a hydrogen atom up. So the photons that are missing here are essentially like being absorbed by a hydrogen atom. And so we have like here sodium atoms, and then we have several other atoms in the blue. So this is a really important thing for astronomy, and this is our way of like understanding what a star is made out of, and for TARDIS specifically, when we simulate this, what a supernovae made out of. So let me go back to sharing this keynote here. So the basics of TARDIS is, as I said, TARDIS is relatively simple, and I'm going to show afterwards. We have a documentation, and I put relatively in quotes because it takes still a lot of lines of codes and a lot of checking to actually write such a code. TARDIS loads these cross sections, these sigma, from known atomic structure values. Essentially, we have line databases and level databases. Well, line databases for the cross sections. We then calculated from a temperature how many atoms are in what level, and this gives us the n in the equation. TARDIS then runs a group of photons through an expanding or an exploding star. TARDIS uses this statistics of these groups of photons to sort of update the temperature, solve again for how many atoms are on what level. This is important for the n in the equation. And then TARDIS finds a solution for the light field and state of matter, and finally produces a spectrum. And then for a given model, we can then see what would the spectrum be that we observe. And I think this might be a really good time to take a quick break of like maybe a few minutes, and you guys ask questions, because I think otherwise I will talk for an hour, and like I will not let you have a question. So please do ask a question now. You can write them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask them here. If no one asks a question, we're just going to sit here in silence, which is not as fun.
Hi, Wolfgang. Can I ask one question?
You can ask two if you want, but let's start with.
So, all right. So from your, sorry, my name is Lisa, not as Lisa, but you can call me Lisa. I'm just curious that you say that in TARDIS you say you load the cross section from atomic structure level, right? So structure values. So does this coming from kind of like table or something like that, or you just take, for example, like some structure of the star that contains certain atomic level to load in TARDIS? So that is my question.
This is a great question. So there's multiple tables or multiple atomic databases, and so one of them, which I'm just gonna share, is called the NIST atomic line transitions, and so we can essentially like look at them here. Let me just do this. Let me see if this works. Share. So let me just share this here. Essentially, we have this in a different format, but we took the data from here, and then it tells us like the transition is at this wavelengths, and has go from he is a good one. Well, I mean, this here's one transition, and it tells us this is the so-called Einstein coefficient, which is essentially the sigma. It's essentially this cross sections. It tells us from which level to which level it goes. It tells us the configuration. It tells us the configuration of the atom, and then there's like a link to where this level was found and described. It can essentially, oh, you can't see this. Let me share this one here. Essentially, this window popped up saying oscillator strengths of ultraviolet ion lines from Hooke method measurements on a furnace. So essentially, these were measurements done in 1973, and so we import all of these into our own specific format, and then they're used in TARDIS. I hope that answered your question. So they're sometimes theoretical and sometimes they're observed. I mean, here they're actually observed from a hot furnace.
Yeah, but my question is, like, a cross section, is it all the atomic, the one that we want to calculate is available for the cross section? Because I thought like cross section is something you have to measure, or I don't know, in perspective of nuclear physics, right? Usually we have a cross section calculating from nuclear reaction rate, whatever, but in atomic level, I'm not sure how it.
So I mean, essentially, they're very similar calculated. You have a many-body quantum system, and so in nuclear physics, I think you calculate. I mean, you solve some time-dependent Schrödinger equation to calculate them. But we do not do this ourselves. We go to other researchers and we just download it from the table. We have atomic physicists working for us, but most of the time there have been well measured or well calculated cross sections for specific transitions. And essentially, so they exist already. Thank you very much. And there's another question by IVC31. If you want to unmute.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Hi. Okay. So in yours, this TARDIS equation, like whatever the code this is, so you're just solving the radiative transfer equation, right? Or you're incorporating.
Yes, we do.
Okay, in that you are just using the absorption part or the full radiative transfer equation to solve.
I mean, we use a full radiative transfer equations. We do not solve the radiative transfer equation classically. We do solve that using a Monte Carlo technique. So there is emission calculated in, but I wasn't sure like how far advanced everyone is and how much people know about this. So I was mostly focusing on the absorption component. There is an emission component, and essentially the lines that we see in the spectrum, there are emission lines and absorption lines due to the unusual nature of like the rate of transfer that happens in a supernova. So we can let me just do P Cygni lines. Let me just share the screen here. So I hope, yeah, that is visible. P Cygni lines. Here we go. So essentially, like the TARDIS calculates these so-called P Cygni lines, which is this absorption feature, which you can see here, and then followed by an emission feature. And so both effects are taken into account in TARDIS. And when you see the spectrum, it is essentially an overlap of many of these features when we go afterwards to the spectra. Did this answer your question?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
That's good. Good.
There's another question in the chat.
Go ahead. Sorry, I'm trying to read.
Can you read it?
Yes. Can TARDIS be used to analyze spectrum of stars collected from an amateur telescope? Yes and no. We don't. So yes, I mean, depending on if your amateur telescope can do a spectroscopy, then you can compare it to TARDIS. But TARDIS currently, so the TARDIS itself only simulates the spectra of exploding stars, of supernovae, not of normal stars. There is our collaboration is building a code called STARDIS, which does not quite work yet, but essentially we'll be able to do stellar spectroscopy. I hope that answers the question. Okay, one more question, and then maybe we can move on. But I mean, you guys can come back in the end. Hiskia.
Wait a moment. So I want to ask questions. If I'm not mistaken, I just read about a TARDIS can, gather the photons from the expanding star. So you just said before that there is a photon that has like emission line and absorption line. Does TARDIS focus on like reduction of the interstellar matter? Because we know that the interstellar matter contains barrier.
TARDIS only simulates the supernova itself. There are other codes that can sort of calculate interstellar matter absorption, but TARDIS does not do that. So TARDIS only focuses on the expanding star itself.
So the TARDIS doesn't calculate the reduction of the interstellar matter because the light comes from far away from the Earth.
No, I mean, but there's other codes. So you could say like there's a supernova, and you can simulate this with TARDIS. And then if you want to simulate something, if you want to simulate how this light from the supernova is attenuated, you use TARDIS to make the light, and then you use a code to attenuate the light. You can use this in conjunction with other stars.
All right, thank you so much.
No worries. There's one more question, and then I'm going to move on. There's many more questions afterwards. So, can TARDIS be used for planetary nebula? Probably. We haven't tried it. In theory, yes. There's a couple of things that are built into TARDIS, and this is actually a great question for the TARDIS model, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. We haven't tried it, and I haven't really thought about it. Whenever you do use TARDIS for, just go to Keynote. Whenever you do use TARDIS, one should think if it really is applicable unless it has been applied to this problem. But it's a good question. It's a very good question. Let me go to the next slides, and then you will see what TARDIS can do and what are the approximations that are built into TARDIS. So let's talk about the TARDIS model. And Farah, this is specifically for you because that applies potentially to planetary nebula as well. So currently TARDIS is a 1D model. There are extension of TARDIS is essentially a collection of different modules, but the current version of TARDIS, or the main part of TARDIS, is put together for this 1D model, and we are extending it for multi-D. But for now, I think 1D is a good thing. And essentially, what we have is a so-called not essentially. We assume a homologous expansion, which is similar in planetary nebula, where you say at a specific point, the velocity is radius divided, or the radius at this point divided by the time since explosion. That means at the very beginning, we assume that all of the points were on top of each other in the center of the supernova. And as it expands, the fastest part of the explosion is here, and then the slow part of the explosion is here. And so we have multiple shells, and each shell in velocity space has a density and an abundance and a temperature, electron temperature, which is needed to calculate ionization as well as excitation, and a radiation temperature, which is needed to calculate the excitation. Sorry, the electron temperatures for the ionization. We have an outer boundary and we have an inner boundary. And essentially between the outer boundary and the inner boundary, there's no energy creation in the envelope. So we only inject energy from this inner boundary. So let me animate this to make it easier for you guys to understand. Essentially, this is the TARDIS model over time. So you can see when the supernova expands, all of these shells are moving. So when you have a photon that sort of escapes in the rest frame, in the frame of the ejector, it is continuously redshifting. If you guys have heard about Doppler shift. So if you have a photon escaping from here, it's continuously redshifting. And so what the TARDIS simulation does, we pick a time. For now, it's time independent. That means you need to pick a specific time. We pick an output luminosity. That's not so important. Then TARDIS solves the plasma states. We have a choice of non-LTE, which you can ask specific questions about later, but you can also look at the documentation, and there's more to come. And so once we have a photon packet, we deal in photon packets, we choose a frequency, and then we choose an energy. So these Monte Carlo packets can be thought of as like packets of many photons, not just a single photon. That's why you have a frequency and an energy. For a single photon, the energy is determined by the frequency. So we sample from the black body, from this inner boundary. We let it fly in a random direction, and then essentially it goes for a while until it interacts. And this is what I was showing before with the lines, until it intersects an atom. This is done probabilistically, and that's the part of this Monte Carlo rate of transfer that is the Monte Carlo part, where we do this randomly. And we do this with thousands and thousands, like, you know, I think our normal simulations 100,000 packets. And that sort of samples this. There's radiation matter interaction. We have bound different methods. We have Thomson scattering and bound free and free are in the code. It says soon here, but this is an older slide. And essentially then it flies into a random direction, and essentially it either escapes through the outer boundary and counts towards the spectrum, or it exits through the inner boundary and is reabsorbed and discarded. And so the other thing that we do is we track how many packets are in each shell for how long and what frequency they have, which gives us an estimate for temperature. And it also gives us this estimate for dilution factor, which I don't want to necessarily go into, but essentially we have these estimators. And so what the TARDIS model does, it first solves the plasma state. So this is how many atoms are in what state. My apologies. How many atoms are in what state? And so you have the number density, n per cubic centimeter, which you need for the e to the minus n times sigma L, and sigma comes from the atomic data, as was asked before. With the Monte Carlo start, we have then these spectrum estimators. The model is updated. If it's too luminous, we have a colder black body. If it's too faint, we have a hotter black body, and update of temperature and dilution factor. And essentially it goes around until it finds a good estimation of the light field, of the radiation field in the cells. So I'm going to quickly now switch to the interactive part, and like I'm going to show a little bit how to install it and how to run it, and then we're going to go back to the science. Please, what is you have a question?
Okay, so is it correct if I say that this is essentially an average of, you said the final result is 1D, right? But you, along the
final
way,
result,
yeah,
is 1D. Along the way, you're absolutely right. Along the way, it's sort of pseudo 2D, but
Yeah.
we don't track like, no, essentially if it flies, and then if it flies in this direction, we only track the angle between the normal, between the radius. And then like if it like, you know, then goes in this direction, we don't track this angle, but we only track the angle between the radius. Now we can do this. Let me see. Let me just do this here. Okay, can you enable me sharing on the iPad? I think that's there's another Wolfgang Kerzendorf in there.
organizer, please.
And I can draw on this in theory. No, it's either iPad WEK or. Yeah, there's another Wolfgang Kerzendorf. Maybe I can raise my hands. Yep. Can you enable sharing for this person, for Wolfgang Kerzendorf? Then I can draw. It might be easier for people to quickly do this. Very nice.
Oh,
Thank
but
you
now
very
is that
perfect. This
okay?
worked perfectly. Okay. Yes. Okay. So let me share this. Here we go. So there was a question about if it's 2D. So essentially, when we fly in this direction, we track the angle to the normal. We track the theta. And then when it scatters here, then we track again the angle towards, we track again this theta angle, but we don't track like now if it goes around. So it's sort of pseudo 2D, which is enough to get these p-signif features. I don't know if you have any, does this answer your question?
Yes, but and your outcome is another table. So when you actually calculating the supernova, you have to integrate from the center to the outside. And each time you call your table.
Oh, I see. So we don't do ray tracing. We like, I mean, if you do this Monte Carlo process, essentially what happens is, like, you know, each one of these packets here, let's say this is a packet, it carries energy packets consist of a nu and an energy. And so in the end, we have, like, nu, the frequency versus, like, flux, which is, or f nu, which is ergs per second per centimeter squared per hertz. And so each one of these nu that comes out, we essentially, like, bin up, and then we get a spectrum like this, if that makes sense. Okay, so every packet, if it leaves, I mean, there's some packets that will go back and, like, scatter into the supernova, they're lost. But if they make it out, if there's the end of the supernova, if they make it out here, then they will be counted towards this spectrum. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yes, thank you.
And we can see this. We go back here. So we can see this in the code itself. There was another question by Shubham.
Yes, yeah. So as you are simulating this supernova, so in supernova we do have these particle accelerations also. So can this code TARDIS be used to understand and answer the particle acceleration inside supernova? No.
So we only simulate light. We don't necessarily simulate any sort of particular effect. You mean like neutrinos flying through the supernova? No, we only simulate, like, all the light escaping this.
Okay.
So there are other codes that can do this, but we are really focused on trying to make something that compares with that can compare with observations. So we look for making, like, visible light spectra. So let me first introduce you to our webpage. So this is the webpage of TARDIS. TARDIS is and github.io, which is our team's website. We have the documentation of the TARDIS package and the CARS package, so you can click on the TARDIS package, and this is the TARDIS package. So I think the first thing, and I don't think you should follow along, just have a look now, and you can then do it on your computer later on. On the installation page, there's a couple of different ways of installing this. Essentially, I always suggest, like, cloning from a GitHub, and there's instructions on how to do this. There's many ways of installing this, and I'm going to quickly sort of, like, show how to do this from GitHub. What you guys should look into is, like, installing Conda. I guess everyone is familiar with Mini Conda and Anaconda. If not, then I'm going to maybe put this in the chat, so you can look up Mini Conda or, like, Anaconda. These are Python installations, and this is all free software. Whatever we make is completely free. So then we have can go to here, maybe GitHub. Sorry. Okay, no, this is obviously not the right time. And I'm just gonna clone this here, and you guys can see the terminal. Live demo is always difficult. New terminal. Yeah. Oh, if you go, I mean, I'm just going into a specific folder, and then I do git clone. And I clone this TARDIS, and you guys can have a look later. There's instructions, very detailed instructions on the web page on how to do this. This is just a quick introduction of, like, how I would install a new TARDIS version. And so once this is installed, it sometimes takes a while to sort of, like, download. Let's see if this is faster. Let's pretend that this downloaded essentially. I'm going to go to this folder here. So this is a cloned TARDIS environment. And so what we can then do is we install an environment. So the way that we package the code is we make a specific environment which has very specific versions for very specific packages like NumPy and SciPy. I presume everyone is familiar with Python, the scientific Python software environment. And then what we can do is conda and create -n TARDIS devel, or like we can name it whatever, and then demo2, and then -f, and we have this environment file, TARDIS environment3.yaml. So we can have a quick look at how this looks like. Essentially, here we specify we're using Python version 3.8, NumPy 1.19, SciPy 1.5, and so on and so forth. And so this means when you do make this TARDIS environment, you're forcing your computer to do exactly the same environment, software environment that we use to develop TARDIS. And the great thing is, like, there's no version mismatches or any problems like this. You will have exactly the same installation as we have. And so it's all written in the installation page. And then essentially, like, you can go and you can get TARDIS installed. So let me go to the demo directory, and then we can start a Jupyter Notebook. And I guess everyone is familiar. Can you raise your hands if you're familiar with Jupyter Notebook? Okay, great. So, I mean, this is a nice Python tool. I really encourage you. All of this software is free. It's open source. You can just download off the internet on your computer. Most of the stuff we do works well on Linux and on Mac. On Windows, you need to use Windows subsystem for Linux, which I'm not as familiar with, but you can always ask us. So essentially, if we go to Jupyter Notebook, here we'll have a little Jupyter Notebook running, and we can get it started. This is taken from the quick start for TARDIS notebook. And so if you go to the TARDIS page here, you can go to quick start for TARDIS. And this essentially is a notebook that shows you how to run TARDIS. And so you can launch this notebook. You can also download this notebook. The only thing that you need to do is download the atomic data, and this is this instruction on how to download the atomic data. There's a couple of other things in there, how to download the example, and I'm going to go into this and show you how to run this on your local computer, but you can also run it in the cloud as in the TARDIS website. I've changed things around a little bit, specifically because I need some visualization tools that we ship with TARDIS. So one of the things is TARDIS has mostly 2 or 3 files. One of them is the configuration file, which is called TARDIS example.yml in this case, but you can use whatever other configuration file you want. This is just an example configuration file. We have the atomic data, which contains all the sigma that were discussed before in a specific format that TARDIS can read. And then you can also give it a specific models with CSVY, which we're not going to do here. And so this is the configuration format. You can see we say something about the supernova, essentially how bright the supernova should be, how many days after explosion we want to run the simulation, what the atomic data file is. Here we have the structure of the supernova. It begins at 11,000 kilometers, has the outer shell at 20,000 kilometers, has 20 shells. We say the abundances are essentially 19% oxygen, 3% magnesium, 52% silicon, 20%, 19% sulfur. And then there's several other configuration options about how we want to simulate the plasma, how we want to run the Monte Carlo simulation, what strategy we use to sort of find the radiation field balance, and how we want the spectrum to be. So TARDIS demo, let's just see. One of the things we have this wonderful widget, which can show us, here we have a specific, this is the density in grams per cubic centimeter. We can see the units on the right-hand side, and we can also change those around. This is one of our visualization widgets, which is available here. Let me just go here. And you can see under visualization tools and widgets, there's a description of all of these. This is the custom abundance widget, and or generate custom abundance widgets, and it has instructions on how to use this. So I'm not going to go into this much further. And then we can run TARDIS, and so this is just running the simulation. And so this is now actually calculating the radiation field, calculating the number densities, and then running these packets that I sort of simulated through the simulation itself. And you can see there's several warnings and several information, what atomic data file is being used. And so once it starts running the simulation, it should go now. So you can see there's progress bars that show us what's going on. And here we can see how the radiation field is updated. And so essentially, like, it's trying to it finds very quickly already the right inner boundary, and it finds very quickly, like, a luminosity that it wants. And here we can see at first, this is sort of the first estimate of the radiation field is not quite right, and then slowly finds, I mean, these are the last estimation of a radiation field throughout the envelope. And so we can see, like, that it sort of quickly finds a solution. And so it goes through here, it prints out what is the current radiation field at different parts. And this information here that you can see here is also shown here in the plot. And so I know this is a lot of information if you've never run TARDIS before, but I sort of want to give you a quick overview of how this works. So we can plot this here. Let me just do this notebook. And so it is now calculating an integrated spectrum, and we'll soon see the spectrum that it outputs. And this is exactly what was asked before, like, what is the output of this? Essentially, it's a spectrum. It takes a little bit of a time to calculate this. And hopefully here we go. I guess the sharing of the screen and things, I guess it was faster before, but I guess it's a little bit slower now. So one of the things, I'm going to get this started as well. Oh, this is fine, I guess. Good, this is running. Let's see. Okay, and here we have the wonderful TARDIS spectrum. Essentially, these are 3 different ways that it can calculate spectrum. We show all of them. We show that they're consistent with each other. Let me just disable one. Let me just disable 2 of them. So this is essentially the spectrum that you get afterwards out, and we can sort of see here at 6,200 angstroms is this very significant silicon line, which we expect and which we can see in type 1a supernovae as well. And essentially, this is the way that sort of TARDIS can calculate a spectrum, and then you can compare it. There was this question about comparing to observed spectrum from an amateur telescope. And you could take this, if you observed a supernova, you could compare this spectrum to the spectrum collected with an amateur telescope. One of the nice things that we afterwards have is we have full access to the model, which we can say, like, what are the inner shells? We use AstroPi a lot. So AstroPi units is a big thing for us. So we can convert it to different units. We can say, how many kilometers per second? It's in centimeters per second, but we can convert it to crazy units like, I don't know, AU per hour. Essentially, all of these things work. And so you can see how many AUs per hour, the shells are expanding, which is a lot. Essentially in 3 hours, the supernova shell expands by the inner supernova shells expands by 1 AU, which is the distance Earth to Sun. We can look at other things. We can access the ion number densities. So there's really a lot of information you can learn. Oh, sorry. So these are the number densities for the ions. This is atomic number 8. So this is oxygen, but we can also do this and this is a pandas data frame. So if you want to play around with this, there's the tool that we use a lot within TARDIS. It's called pandas. And essentially you can sort of look at silicon And you can see like, you know, silicon 1 and silicon 2 very heavily populated. And we can also plot this. And we can see here silicon 2, so silicon with this is silicon 2 silicon 3. So silicon with 2 or 3 electrons removed is the most prominent one. There's very few neutral silicon, and we can also do the same thing for the level number density. And we can look at, for example, silicon. This is silicon 2, so once ionized silicon, and you can sort of see that the ground state is the most populated part, but then it sort of falls off. This is given in logarithmic units. You can calculate the temperature of the electrons, and you can calculate also what we calculate. This is tau subbolus with this n sigma L. So there's really a lot of information, and I do realize, like, you know, ultimately you will not understand a lot of this. I just want to sort of show that there's a lot of information there, and we can learn a lot of information from the internals of TARDIS. Sorry, let's go here. So if you want to sort of have a look into this a little bit in more detail, we can go here and we can see we have a shell info widget. All of this is again described in the documentation here. And I think more interestingly is, and let me jump to this here, is a spectral decomposition plot where we can see, we can zoom in here, and we can see, like, you know, for example, the line that I was describing before. Let me go back here. The line that I was describing before is mostly called by, well, this is silicon. I don't know why it says magnesium emission. It's this magnesium emission, but silicon absorption is mostly called by silicon absorption. I said the 6,200 angstrom line is mostly called by, caused by silicon absorption. And so you can really, like, you know, dig into TARDIS algorithmically, as I showed, but you can also have all of these visualization tools that sort of tell you, like, you know, that when the TARDIS spectrum comes out, this is what elements caused which lines. And so the weird thing about the supernova, each line is not only caused by a single element, but often these are very overlapping lines that are sort of redshifted into each other as we have this expanding envelope, as I said before. And maybe now is a good time to take a break again and see if there's questions about the use of TARDIS before we maybe jump more into, again, the science that we do with TARDIS. So this is mostly how to use it, and I showed many different tools. All of them are documented at the webpage. Should be very easy to install, hopefully. We're trying very hard to make it easy to install. Any questions about TARDIS and the use of TARDIS?
If not, then I will ask.
Go.
Okay, so sorry. Wait a moment, I forgot suddenly.
It's early morning.
No. Just a moment. I suddenly forget. Okay, other people first, please. If I recall,
Okay,
I will ask.
oh, right. Maybe Dr. Lucky want to ask first.
You.
Please, you.
Oh, okay, all right. So I just curious that about TARDIS. You have shown to us that how you put the input, everything in the TARDIS, right? So I'm curious that is it the input purely come the spectral, or is it also can be from the progenitor models?
So this is the other way around. The input is purely from the progenitor models. So let me show this to you. Essentially, what we put into TARDIS, and that's a great question. Essentially, what we put into TARDIS, this is the input model. Okay. So it has a density gradient. It has an abundance gradient. In this case, there's no abundance gradient, but the abundances are uniform throughout the envelope. This is from 10,000 kilometers to 20,000 kilometers. And you can see the most abundant element is silicon, and then we have sulfur, and then we have, there's a way to switch this to a log plot somewhere. Yeah, here we go, linear and log. And you can see that elements like argon and calcium, this is only what we give in this, example model, but you can change this. So this is just like one example model where you sort of say like, no, okay, oxygen is 20%, silicon is 52%, and you can sort of see like, no, this is this example model, and we display this example model there. But you can make much more complex models. So it needs a progenitor model to calculate the spectrum. It does not analyze a spectrum by itself.
I see.
The analysis of spectrum with, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry. So it means that you take, like, for example, a structure of the progenitor models, for example,
Yes.
at the silicon burning phase, whatever, and then you put in the TARDIS, and then you get all this calculation. Am I correct?
Yes. So you put this in, you put a progenitor model in where you say, this is the density gradient, this is how much oxygen there's, this is how much iron there's. And then when you run TARDIS, in the end, it will find the self-consistent solution. And the output of TARDIS is really this. That is the output of TARDIS, which then can be compared to an observed spectrum.
Oh,
So
right.
this is the output. And so maybe I'm sorry I didn't make this clear enough, but this is the output. And then at the top we have the input. And so our goal, like partially part of the research we do, is we're trying to make algorithms that find the right input to make make the output that we observe.
All right. Okay, thanks. Great. Sounds
Thank you. Hasina.
Yeah, I recall. Okay, it's connected to the question. So your solution is static for some input of the density gradient.
Yes.
So you do not calculate the structure of the shell itself.
No. So essentially, we can, as I said before, we only calculate during the homologous expansion, and that means like the structure, the density structure, as well as the abundance structure, like what elements are at what position, is sort of frozen in place. So there's no shock waves involved. So we need to have a star that has exploded and where the outer shell moves the fastest, and then the inner shell moves always slightly slower.
Okay. And what is the computing time, roughly?
So you saw this was when I ran this just now. I mean, it took, what did it say? It took like, I don't know, a couple of minutes.
And what kind of
how long did we
CPU?
wait? We were 33 seconds. 33 seconds.
Okay.
And this is now using multiple processors on my CPUs. I want to say this was a very simple model. More complex models that have lots of iron group elements, I want to say sort of on a modern laptop, 5 to 10 minutes. So it's fast, but it's not like, very, very fast. And so this is partially part of the work we've been doing, is like trying to find ways to sort of accelerate this to explore the parameter space.
Okay, thank you.
Any other question? There was Lucky, you had a question?
Yes, thank you very much, Wolfgang. So I have a few questions. First, can we run the TARDIS also in like Google Colab, Jupyter Notebook? And then secondly,
I'll just answer the first question straight off the bat. So I don't know if it works in Jupyter Colab. It should work essentially on most computers, and there's this I'm going to the installation page. On Windows, it works in this WSL, and there's a link to WSL on how to do this. It works well on Linux and on macOS, and so if you have a laptop, it should work. And most modern laptops can definitely handle this. You can also click here and launch a notebook online. Actually, this was the wrong one. If you go to Quick Start, you can launch all of these notebooks online, and then it is run in a thing called Binder, and that is completely online, and you can run it there.
That's very nice.
We have not. Let's see if this works. So this is now not running on my computer. This is running on the other. On the Binder computer. And then you need to just do this and downloading the data. Hopefully. So now we can see that it's here. And this is, you can see here, this is not running on my computer. This is running in the cloud. And you just needed to click on launch in Binder. And you can see here now we are actually currently running. Okay, we are actually currently running this in the cloud, and I don't know how long it will take. I guess we don't have a lot of CPU power available, but I think we do have some on the cloud. And so I think it might take another minute or so until it's done. So we're currently simulating a supernova in the cloud.
Well, that's nice to know. And then secondly, when we have this model spectrum, is the resolution, can we adjust the resolution or?
So the resolution, yeah, you can adjust the resolution. So now it's running. You can adjust the resolution essentially here, and you can sample it finer or less fine. So we have now between 500 and 20,000 angstrom with 10,000 bins. And the finer you make it, the more noisy it gets. And if you make it quite fine, I would suggest running it with many more packets. Now here we run it with 100,000 packets, but you can increase this to like 1 million packets, for example. And I mean, as I said, like this simple model doesn't take that long to run. So let's see what this says at the very end. Ran many iterations. It's very chatty. It prints out a lot of information. Okay, here we go. So it took more than a minute to run the cloud. So my computer is faster than the cloud. But ultimately, yeah, I think it runs and for trying things out, and then you obviously can plot the spectrum here. And this will take a while to run. Calculate this line here calculates integrated spectrum, so it takes a while to run. And then when we come back, hopefully this works. So I hope that answered your questions.
Thank you so much.
Good. Okay, so in the interest of time, let me switch back to the non-interactive part. You can install it on your laptop. You can run it in the cloud. It should be very easy. And if there's any questions, please you can go to our Gitter link and you can ask us there. There's a lot of, let me put this in there. gitter.im/TARDIS/SN/TARDIS. This is a great link where you can ask questions if you have trouble installing it. So this is sort of a chat room for questions.
Excuse me.
Okay, go ahead.
There is a question in YouTube. Would you like to answer this one?
In YouTube?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So
I will
read
read the question.
Please do. Please. Yes.
Just a moment. Okay. Hi, my name is Dio. In the previous slide, it was mentioned that one of the TARDIS goal is to test gravitational radiation, GR, general relativity or gravitation. I don't know. Can you please elaborate more of this, please? GR.
So we do not, TARDIS only simulates light and does not simulate gravitational radiation or neutrinos or anything like this. It only simulates how light escapes a exploding star. And so I think that answered the question. There's other codes that can do gravitational wave testing, but our code cannot do this. And it's really comparing spectra of supernova to synthetic spectra. Yes, yeah, GR2. We don't do GR, general relativity, in TARDIS at all. Okay. So a quick sort of introduction to supernovae. Maybe, I mean, I know there were many questions. I'm very, very happy that there were many questions. But that also means I don't get to share a lot of the exciting research that we do. But let me talk a little bit about supernovae. There's type 1 versus type 2. So we have here the type 2 supernovae, and we have the hydrogen bomber series. This is a well-known supernova type. And then we have compared to type 1, which does not show these hydrogen features, which is very unusual. Things in the universe don't normally have hydrogen, so it's unusual that they don't. We have silicon, we have sulfur, we have iron group elements, we have calcium, but we have no hydrogen in these type 1 supernovae. This is a specific subtype called type 1a, but ultimately, this is the difference between type 1 and type 2 is type 1 and type 1a don't show hydrogen, which is very unusual. So from the light curves, these type 2 supernovae, we have this is a so-called type 2p supernova, essentially has this plateau before it falls off, and type 1as go up and then down. And so for type 1as, which is the specific research goal that we have, this decay is powered by the decay of nickel 56 to cobalt 56 and then cobalt 56 to iron 56, which is one of the most important radioactive decay chains in the universe, powering many supernova light curves, including the 1as. So type 1a, so the question is, you might say, like, why should you care about type 1a? Well, first of all, type 1as can be calibrated to be able to measure distances in the universe. And so in the late 90s, we sort of calibrated them to measure the expansion rate of the universe, and we're very surprised to see that it's not slowing down the acceleration of the expanding rate of the universe, which we were expecting due to gravity, but it's actually accelerating, which led to the discovery of dark energy, which led to the Nobel Prize in 2011, which used these type 1a supernovae as distance indicators. So type 1a supernovae are also responsible for roughly half the iron, so half the iron in your blood that brings oxygen to your lungs, from your lungs to your body, in your blood, that is made by type 1a supernova. So you consist, the reason why you can breathe easy is because of type 1a supernovae. And we have cell evolution, which these type 1a supernovae are very interesting endpoints of cell evolution. Let me just click this away. And so this is why we care about type 1a supernovae. One of the problems is we don't know what they are. We have a couple of hints. We said no hydrogen. We have radioactive decay of nickel 56 to cobalt 56 to iron 56, which leads us to the idea that this is probably a nuclear fusion reaction in carbon-oxygen matter. And the thing that we know has a lot of carbon-oxygen matter is our white dwarfs. But white dwarfs are at the end of their lifetime, and in theory should just cool for eternity. And so the question is, like, why do white dwarfs explode? I want to highlight here that there's many types of type 1a supernovae. There's many types of type 1a supernovae, and they span a large range in luminosities. Some of them we use for cosmology, others we use for we sort of just have discovered. But there's many different types for many different types of type 1a supernovae, even though you might have heard in class that they're all very similar. This is just a quick note on the side. I'm gonna skip this slide in the interest of time. Let me just skip here to this. So I think the main question that my research team is asking with TARDIS is, why do white dwarfs ignite? And so one of the ways to sort of think about this problem is to look at the densities of white dwarfs, or densities of parts of white dwarfs. We have here the density on the x-axis and the temperature on the y-axis. And essentially here we have a line where we say, if a white dwarf crosses this line and becomes more dense and more hot than this line, we have a runaway process. So below this, we have neutrino cooling. There's more neutrino cooling than the nuclear burning, and above this we have stable burning. Above this we have more heating than cooling, and so whenever you have more heating than cooling, then things explode. And so our main question is, how do we bring parts of the white dwarf from below the line to above the line? There's three sort of main scenarios, and you might have seen them in your class. One of these scenarios is this accretion from a red giant companion. This is often called the singlet degenerate scenario, and probably in your astronomy classes you might have talked about this. So we accrete matter from a red giant to a white dwarf, and when you reach like on very high densities, you have this runaway explosion. There's a newer method where we think this might also work. is we accrete a so-called helium shell, then we burn around the white dwarf, compress the white dwarf, and get the high densities by this compression. And there's this wonderful movie by Rüdiger Packmore, and you can see at some stage that the burning starts in a second. Here we go. In a little bit, so suddenly we have this flame starting to run around the star, compressing the star, and then we reach these high densities and temperatures. The last one that we are sort of like looking at is we have two white dwarfs that merge, and during this merger process, we have this explosion. And so our question is like, what makes type 1a supernovae? How do we make white dwarfs explode? Is it either this scenario, the middle scenario, or the left scenario? And so for us, this is very very important to find out, is because we have different evolution times. So it takes a different amounts of time. So as we make iron, and iron is so important for Earth-like planets, does this happen very early in the universe, or are we one of the first planets that is like a rocky planet, or one of the last planets? So the other part that they give different brightnesses, and that is important for these distance measurements that I was saying before. So on multiple fronts, the question which one of these scenarios is the right one is important to the rest of astrophysics, and it's very near and dear to my heart. That's why I researched this. So one of the things, maybe we'll skip this and go to the predictions, to the scenario predictions. Essentially, we have one of these scenario predictions is the flame propagations. And so for very heavy white dwarfs that are near to the Chandrasekhar mass, they're not at the Chandrasekhar mass, but near to the Chandrasekhar mass, we have a so-called deflagration and then detonation. So deflagration is a normal subsonic flame. So most of when you have a fire, you have a deflagration, and detonation is a flame that races faster than the speed of sound. So like you have, and in these 1.38 solar mass, you have a deflagration to detonation transition. And on the other hand, you have relatively light white dwarfs. They're only weighing as much as the sun. And so there you have a detonation. Both of these give you explosions that explain type 1a supernovae. And so we are trying to figure out which one of those is it? Is it one of these slower accretions, or is it one of these slow accretion which has a deflagration detonation, or do we have a pure detonation? And you can see that the makeup of the exploded star is different here, the different elements. So we have lots more unburnt material in this part than in this part, and we have it a lot more mixed through on the right hand side. And so what we are trying to do is like trying to reconstruct the exploded objects from observations. And so this is called supernova tomography. And here we have this nice explanation of like, how a spectrum is made. And this is very similar how we think about it in TARDIS. We have this inner boundary, which is a red inner boundary that emits a smooth continuum. And then we have the outer boundary, which imprints the line features on top. And so as I'm going to play the movie, you can see that slowly this inner boundary expands, but it expands much slower than the outer boundary. And essentially we can, when we observe the supernova multiple times, essentially we see like, changes, and we can in theory reconstruct the exploded object and then figure out how it exploded. So we have this emits a smooth continuum, and then emits, we have the elements above this photosphere imprint features, the elements above this photosphere above the red circle imprint features onto the smooth continuum, and this is the spectrum we get out. And so essentially, like, what we want to do is we want to reconstruct from the observed. So on the bottom one, we have the observed time series. We want to reconstruct the exploded star. And so for now, this is done by varying like parts of TARDIS, by varying essentially these parameters and finding solutions that sort of fits. One of the problems is if you do this by hand and not with a computer, you essentially will not find uncertainties and degeneracies. And I don't know how much you've heard about Bayesian statistics in your courses, But essentially, like, this is one of the things we're trying to avoid. We're trying to make this exploration of the parameter space much faster and much more reproducible. And so I think essentially what we're trying to do is doing this in Bayesian statistics. I don't know how much you know about Bayesian statistics, and maybe we're going to skip this, and I'm going to quickly show you how we, in the end, like, what kind of result we find. This is not part of TARDIS. TARDIS is only this forward model that I showed you, and is not essentially this inverse model. But let me jump to this. Here we can see observation in green, and we can see, like, many evaluations of many TARDIS models accelerated by our machine learning technique called the Dalek emulator, and explored by a specific computer program to sort of find not a fit, but, like, find a sample of spectra that sort of fit this. And then what we essentially get out of this is a distribution of elements. So this is a so-called posterior probability distribution, where we can sort of say, like, it is very likely that the supernova has, like, 10 to the minus 2, which is essentially 1% of carbon, but it could also be that it has much less, so 10 to the minus 5 as a mass fraction of carbon. And so we can also see that the magnesium is not constrained at all by these spectra. And this is a very new technique. I didn't want to go much into this, but this is just showing how we use TARDIS in our research to infer what the supernova was made of, and then infer how stars exploded. And essentially, our main goal is to take spectral time series, reconstruct the explosion, and then figure out, like, was it either a deflagration to detonation transition, or pure detonation. And so essentially, like, you can see for different elements, you sort of have different probability distributions. This is one thing that we do with TARDIS to figure out, like, how so-called these type 1A supernovae work. The other thing that we do with TARDIS is we're trying to figure out what the nucleosynthesis is. So while both of these models that I showed before make the same amount of nickel 56, they make a different amount of nickel 57. And if we look at these decay chains, so nickel 56 has a half-life of 6 days, and decays to cobalt 56, and then cobalt 56 takes 77, has a half-life of 77 days to decay to iron 56. And for different elements, these decay times are different. And so in theory, we can see at the after many days, so this is 1200 days since explosions, that the light curves that we predict for different models are different. And so what we have tried to do is measure this in a so-called supernova type, in the supernova 2011 FE, and then models with TARDIS. And this, unfortunately for now, is an ongoing project with our postdoc Andrew Fullard. Currently, TARDIS approximates the energy using an inner boundary black body. As I showed, like, you have this inner photosphere where we emit all the energy from, but we're trying to remove this and then add gamma ray deposition to this to simulate these very late phases to understand if the supernova decays faster or slower, and then compare this to observations. And so essentially, this is a first. We now have the gamma ray deposition in. So if someone wants to do a gamma ray spectrum, this is already in TARDIS, and you can also run this and do this, and you can contact us about this. There's a couple of other things that we sort of do, and this is mostly our 1A work. We're also looking at type 2P supernovae, where we can, in addition to type 1A supernovae, measure the distances once we calculate the radius and the temperature. And similar to what we do in type 1A supernovae is we're trying to fit. So again, we have here the TARDIS version trying to fit an observed spectrum, which is given in black here. And you can see this TARDIS fits it relatively well, and it allows us to calculate the distance to this specific supernova. Just a word of caution: if you're trying to simulate type 2P supernovae with TARDIS, the current version that is publicly available doesn't do this, and you should contact us if you're trying to do this. So if you are having questions about using TARDIS for Type 2P Supernova, please contact us beforehand. Good. I think the last thing that I want to show is we're also trying to look at Type 1BC Supernova, which have big stars that have lost the envelope. But essentially, like, this is preliminary work by our student, Mark Williamson. And so we can see here again that we're sort of trying to infer these helium and hydrogen abundances and oxygen and carbon abundances using a very similar technique for the Type 1a supernovae. I think that sort of like, brings me to the end. And I guess we have 10 minutes for question. And maybe let me go back and I'll again remind you of our summer projects. So as I said, we're an interdisciplinary. To go back to the beginning, we have this interdisciplinary open science project. So we're an interdisciplinary open science project to work on the TARDIS rate of transfer code. We're a collaboration. We don't only make the TARDIS code, but the TARDIS code is one of the things we make. You can follow us on Twitter. You can reach out on gitter.im, and let me see if already people are saying something here. Essentially, like, this is a good place to ask questions. As I said, like, if you're interested in working with us, you don't need to be an expert coder, just interested in working in a team and learning. So, like, we have various summer opportunities. The main opportunity that we do for the Northern Hemisphere summer is this Google Summer of Code project, where you can apply, but you can also reach out to us if you want to do other things. We are also we are mostly working on GitHub. So if you want to just download it and play with TARDIS, you can do this, but you can also contribute code, or you can look at the issues and see if there's a specific issue that you would like to fix. Skills building and mentoring is built into our collaboration, as I said, and we're doing this participation as a mentoring organization in Google Summer of Code. And I think you can contact me or the team. My email is wkerzen@msu.edu if you have specific questions, but better it's just to contact us via the skitter.im link. Oops, sorry, that was the wrong one. I'll put it in the chat again. And I guess on that note, I'm going to end and going to have some time for questions, if you have any. Or if you're all busy installing TARDIS and running TARDIS and making Supernova Spectra, which is great as well. Let me go here and open maybe the GitHub repository. Ami, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. I would like to ask because from your explanation, it seems like Type A supernovae is predicted to be a result of some different mechanism, and they are not really similar like what we are taught in astronomy class. So why that type of supernova is still used to calculate distance and cosmological parameters?
So why it can be used for calculating cosmological distance parameters, or
yes,
is that the question?
Yes, because
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, because in astronomy class we are taught that because it was similar in mass, so
no, it doesn't have to be similar in mass. So essentially, it doesn't seemingly matter. We don't understand how 1A supernovae work, and we don't use this in our calculation for distances. So it is purely empirically calculated. So the way that we calibrate Type 1A supernovae, let me maybe go here. No, hello. So what people have done in, I'm hoping I'm finding this. Yeah, this is maybe a great place to look at this. So what people have done in the early 90s is they measured the distances to galaxies that contain Type 1A supernovae using the period luminosity relationship of Cepheids. I don't know if you've heard of period luminosity relationship of Cepheids before. Yeah. So once you've done this, what Mark Phillips did, he figured out that there was a relationship. This is very annoying. Phillips. relationship paper. Here we go. Let me just open this one. Apologies. So essentially what Mark Phillips did, and we can see this here, is he calculated that for, he can calculate, given the distance to the galaxies using the period luminosity relationship of Cepheids, he calculated that essentially the decline rate of supernova is related to its brightness. And so essentially less luminous supernovae fade faster and more luminous supernovae fade slower. And so we still don't know how they work, but they seemingly follow this relationship very, very tightly. The only problem is that we don't know how this works, is like we are relying on the locally calibrated supernovae. So if type 1a supernovae work differently at very high distances and at the very beginning of the universe, then this relationship will be screwed up and will essentially screw up our measurements of the cosmological distances. But it doesn't have to be that. First of all, like type 1a supernovae vary by a factor of 2. They're not all the same brightness. They're different brightnesses. They're not standard. They're not standard candles. They're standardizable candles, which is very, very important. I hope that sort of helped.
Yes, thank you very much.
There's the other question by Aisha. Can the abundance generated from Mesa evolution code at the end of the burning stage suitable be used in TARDIS? Sort of. Not quite, because essentially you need to explode the star before you can put it into TARDIS. So we are trying currently to put in there's a type 2P on Mesa, type 2P. Mesa can explode stars using type 2P supernova. Here we go. PubMed. There is a way to explode type 2P supernova in Mesa, or I think there's also maybe type 1a supernova using Mesa and Stella. And this is on the tutorial page. And now I'm trying to figure out, there's a tutorial page, and you can take the exploded Mesa Stella output and put it into TARDIS. But currently TARDIS is still missing, and so hopefully finishing this in the next months, is still missing a good way of simulating hydrogen absorption and hydrogen absorption in multiple bands. So yes, in theory, but not quite there yet. But the right approach, like your question is dead on, is very good. Any other question?
Okay. It's now 9:29. It's very, if there is one more question. Okay, no, it's just about the time. Thank you very much, Wolfgang. It's very interesting, and I'm sure there were many questions, and this has interested most of the participants here. And as you said, I hope there are many more questions, and you can contact Wolfgang and on the specified address he has already mentioned. Okay.
Yep.
And the organizer said that we have to make a photo as usual before we end this session. Okay, go ahead, organizer.
Okay, dear participants, please open your cam. Please open your camera because we are going to check our picture. In this room, there are 3 slides, so we will check about 2 times per slide. Okay, we'll start from the first slide. 1, 2, 3. Okay, once again. 1, 2, 3. Okay, the second slide. We'll check the picture. 1, 2, 3. Once again, 1, 2, 3. Okay, the last slide. We'll check the picture. 1, 2, 3. Once again, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Wolfgang, you still have
If you have the
another.
pictures, if you have the pictures, I would love to have them.
Okay, sure. You still have one more agenda, and it's already very late in your place. Okay, again, thank you very much for your time and your energy, and it's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would like to very much thank you, Dr. Putra and Dr. Puspitarini, for organizing this conference and giving me the chance to talk to so many interested people. And I think it's great, and all the best of you for the next things. I'll be online on Slack and on Gitter, and if you have any questions, please do follow up. And good evening from New York, and I'll hope to see you all maybe at some stage in person. Have a good one. Bye.
Okay, bye. Okay, I think I will transfer again to the organizer. Thank you very much. I end my job here.